Waking you up. Okay. When we think of Mount Everest, we think of such a big feat. We think of the people who have summited, and up to now, officially, there are about 6,800 plus who have already summited Mount Everest. And every year that number keeps increasing by about 400, 500. And then we look at something where, as of right now, just 79 people have already completed successfully. And that is not even 2% of the ascents to the summit of Mount Everest. What I'm talking about is basically a solo, unassisted sail around the world. And we have with us this morning someone who has accomplished it for the first time from our country. And in fact, for the first time from Asia practically. And basically, he did it within a shorter time that he had envisaged as well. He had envisaged 6 months and it got done in about 5 months, if I'm not certain. He'll be giving you all the details soon. Who I'm talking about is Lieutenant Commander Abhilash Tomy. Tomy has been with the Indian Navy. He's basically someone who we in Goa have been very proud to have been associated with before he did his all-around, unassisted, non-stop, solo circumnavigation of the globe. We did a learning session with him just before he left. And we have beautiful pictures on the boat. And in fact, if you look at the Voice of Young Indians, on page 27, you will see the picture of Tomy explaining about the boat with us. And he's here. He's going to be doing a session with you all. He's going to be telling you about his trip, about what have been his observations on board. Let me tell you, it's not easy. It's not easy to be going for 5 months without seeing a single human soul. I mean, he's told me that he saw mermaids on the way. He's told me that they tried to pull him off the boat, but he refused. He stood steadfast. He said, I have to complete my assignment. He's been with the Indian Navy for a long time. His voyage was part of the Indian Navy's Sagar Parikrama 2. Sagar Parikrama first was done by Commander Dilip Donde, who sailed in 2009, but he had 4 stops. And in fact, Tomy, during those stops, was one of the shore support for Commander Donde. He has already been awarded the Kirti Chakra, which is the second highest peacetime gallantry award, and the Tenzing Norgay National Adventure Award. Ladies and gentlemen, Abhilash Tomy.
When Earl told me that he's a part of Young Indians, I thought that this organization redefined the term young. And I don't know how many of you noticed while Earl was giving the introduction, his nose was growing and growing and growing. Well, I like the idea of going to sea, so I became a naval officer. And then I like the idea of looking down on people, so I became a naval pilot. And then one day, the Navy made me the skipper of a boat, which I really liked because now I could be at sea and I could still look down on people. One day the Navy asked me, do you want to be out at sea all alone for 6 months? They asked me this question. And I said, yeah, I would love to, but what's the catch? The Navy said, you have to do a solo, non-stop, unassisted circumnavigation of the entire planet. Okay, so what does this solo, non-stop, unassisted circumnavigation of the planet mean? Essentially, I had to begin my voyage from a port in India, sail around the world without stopping anywhere, and come back to the point where I'd started from, right? You cannot take anybody's assistance. You cannot take any sort of help. You cannot stop anywhere. And you need to follow certain rules. You need to sail a distance of 21,600 nautical miles, or 40,000 kilometers at one go, and 40,000 kilometers is the length of the equator. The equator itself has to be crossed 2 times, and you cannot take any of the canals. You cannot go through the Panama Canal, you cannot go through the through the Suez Canal. If I take the canals, it becomes very easy. I need to sail south of the 3 great capes of the Southern Ocean, which is Fremantle in Australia, Cape Leuven in Australia, Cape Horn in South America, which is known as the Everest of the oceans, and Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, which is known as the graveyard of ships. Now, how difficult is it? What is the difficulty level we are looking at? As Earl just mentioned, the number of people who have climbed Everest is almost 6,000. The number of people who have gone to space is almost 580 or so. But the number of people who have sailed around the world solo, non-stop, and unassisted in a sailboat south of the 3 great capes of the southern hemisphere, the number is just 80 or so. Now, when I talk about the oceans, when I talk about the sea to my fellow countrymen, they really don't know what it is like. They think that a solo circumnavigation is all about spending time alone with yourself. They think that your main problem is that of solitude. They think that the main problem is how does this man carry food for 6 or 7 months? Okay, khana kharab nahi ho jayega kya? Akele bore nahi ho jayega kya? These are the questions that my countrymen ask me because they really don't know what the oceans are like. Now let me tell you, out of these 23,000 nautical miles in 200 days that you're planning to be out at sea, you're sailing through regions of the planet that are known to be without rules, without laws, without gods, and without even common sense. Okay, when you cross the equator, temperatures could be as high as 40 degrees, and when you're crossing Cape Horn, temperatures could be as low as minus 10 degrees. And it is in these oceans that you not only survive, but you sustain and continue sailing towards your destination. Now, like I said, one of the crucial points of this voyage is that you cannot take anybody's help, you cannot take anybody's assistance once you have left the harbors of Mumbai. So a lot of effort goes into planning and preparations. Now, I had done something like 27,000 nautical miles of sailing as part of training. In addition, I underwent some classroom instructions in communication, global maritime distress and safety, search and rescue, navigation, meteorology, oceanography, medicine, media editing, survival, etc., etc. So if you look at this list, you'll realize that this man, this sailor who's alone at sea, is so many things. He's a communicator, he's a navigator, he's an engineer, he's an electrician, he's a doctor, he's a cook, he's a steward, he cleans his toilets, he does weather predictions, and he has to be everything that the ocean asks him to be. And then the boat itself had to be prepared. Food was sourced from 3 different sources. The Defense Food Research Laboratories gave me about 150 packets of pre-cooked meals. Then my brother packed 100 packets of freeze-dry rations and sent it all the way from New Zealand. And a lot of friends of mine, they got together, they dehydrated vegetables, they packed a lot of stuff that could last this long, and they segregated into various boxes so that for any given month, all that I needed to do was open a box and I could find sufficient food to eat in it. Water itself had 3 sources. I had an RO plant that could convert seawater to fresh water. I carried about 600 liters of water in tanks and about 300 liters in bottles. And then spares and tools for every equipment on the boat, for the generator, for the engine, for the electronics, for the navigation equipment, for the communication equipment. Spares and tools for all these equipment had to be identified, and I had to carry them with me because I had to deal with any problem that would occur inside of the boat. And then I underwent a mandatory health checkup, and I carried all the medicines that I needed for the voyage. So, after 3 years of preparation, Sagar Parikrama 2 was ready to go, and it happened on the 1st of November 2012, which was Kerala Foundation Day. And I carried all the food and water that I needed for the voyage. Lord Varuna, Lord of the Oceans himself, was present to give me his blessings. And I took permission from the CNC, and I bid farewell to my friends. I sailed out into what looked like a very calm and benign ocean. But there's a saying, those who go to sea for pleasure, go to hell for pastime. On the first day itself, I had to deal with a crisis. A cyclone, Neelam, which had caused a lot of destruction in the eastern coast, was crossing over and coming into the Bay of Bengal. and coming into the Arabian Sea. Now, when a seafarer sees a cyclone, he doesn't want to be out at sea. But in my case, I was a happy man because for a sailor at sea, wind is currency. Okay, and I was a very rich man thanks to the cyclone. Put a lot of distance between myself and Mumbai quickly, but soon enough, the crisis passed. But yeah, any man can deal with a crisis. It's the day-to-day living that kills. I soon ran into a windless hole. I got stuck there. It was off the coast of Kerala, and it appeared as if my hometown was not ready to let go of me. Now, when you have a lot of wind, sailing is a very rough experience. When you don't have any winds at all, it becomes a very frustrating experience. You can't leave your sails on the mast because they flap and they tear. And if the sails tear, it's as good as losing your engine. Okay, I can't do the circumnavigation. So what you do is, when there is no wind, you take all the sails down, and when there's a little bit of wind, what you call the catspaw, you hoist all these sails up. Now, this particular sail that you see me hoisting is about 2,500 square feet in area. And you need to remember that the average size of a house in Mumbai is just 1,000 square feet. Okay, this is 2.5 times the average size of a home in Mumbai. And it has to go all the way up 25 meters, the height of a 7-story building, purely using muscle power. I've got another sail which is called the main sail, 1,000 square feet in area, 100 kilos. And imagine lugging a 100 kg sail up a 7-story building, not once, but 5 or 6 times a day. So every time you lose winds, you need to take off these sails. And whenever you get a little bit of winds, you need to hoist all these sails. And this is how I gathered whatever speed I could. And off the coast of Sri Lanka, I found some fresh winds, and we crossed the equator, I think 15 days after I left Mumbai. From here, I was headed to Cape Leuven. That was my first checkpoint. I was not stopping there. It was my first checkpoint. Winds blow from the southeast. Trade winds blow from the southeast. I was heading into the trade winds, and this is what sailing was like. I had about 25-30 knot winds on the nose, about 3 to 4 meter high waves. The boat was usually heeled to one side by about 30 or 40 degrees. Now imagine this. Imagine the practical problems of living in a house which is like this. Imagine, close your eyes for a moment, imagine you're back in your homes, you want to visit your toilet, and you see that your toilet is at an angle of 40 degrees to one side. Now you are all young Indians, brave people, like Earl. You are brave people, so you take the chance and you sit on that toilet that is heeled to 40 degrees. Okay. When you're about to sit, you realize that the toilet is going up and down by 4 meters. Right? So that's how I was spending my time. It was literally like living inside of an earthquake. Now this lasted for about 6-7 days, and I continuously sailed southward, got out of the system, and from there I crossed the Tropic of Capricorn, and I was entering into a totally new weather system, which is called the frontal activity, or what you call the extratropical cyclones. Now, in the Bay of Bengal or in the Arabian Sea, in the Bay of Bengal, you have maybe 1 cyclone per year, maybe 2 cyclones per year. In the Arabian Sea, you may have 1 cyclone in 10 years. But in the southern oceans, you have at least 5 extratropical cyclones at any given point in time. And this is irrespective of which month you are there in. Okay. And in the summers, wind speeds inside of these cyclones can be as high as 70 knots. And in winters, it can be as high as 100 knots. I'm sure you don't understand 70 and 100 knots. I'll quickly convert it to kmph. 70 knots is roughly 140 to 150 kmph. 100 knots is about 200 kmph. Okay, and let me take you back to Cyclone Neelam, which killed a lot of people in Tamil Nadu coast. The average wind speed in Cyclone Neelam was only 40 knots. Okay, 80 kmph winds. That was the average there. Here, I was looking at average of 70 to 100 knots. Now, the first of the systems hit me when I was about around Australia. This system promised about 45 knot winds and about 8 meter waves. And when the predictions say that winds are going to be 45 knots, you need to add another 40% to cater for gust factor. And when they say that the wave height is going to be 8 meters, that is the average height of waves. The actual height is twice the average height. The actual maximum height is twice the average height. So I was looking at something like 60-65 knot winds and about 16 meter high waves. And this is what the ocean looked like then. It was neither blue, nor black, nor gray, but it was white because the tops of the waves were being chopped off by the winds and it was spread as white foam all across the sea. And in the middle of this storm, I get a message from Admiral Avati, the godfather of the project. He says, bash on regardless, bash on regardless, bash on regardless. This message really confused me because I was not sure if he was asking me to bash the seas or was he asking the seas to bash me up. We kept bashing each other up. And the first wicket was taken by the sea. The stainless steel fitting, which provides support to the mast, it parted. It parted in the first storm that I encountered. And for the first time in the voyage, I was not sure if the boat would be able to sail all the way across the Atlantic and the Pacific and the Indian Ocean again and come back to the place where we started without too much of problem. And I decided at this point that I will be conservative because my idea was to come back and not to set a time record. As we crossed the Great Australian Bight, I started predicting these systems much better, and I was taking 200 to 300 miles detour to the left and to the right to avoid the brunt of these systems. And it was somewhere here, close to New Zealand, on the 55th day, alone at sea, that I celebrated Christmas. And look at this video. I was smiling, I was happy, despite the fact that I had been alone at sea for 55 days, made a meal of vegetables, opened the last can of soda in the boat, and said cheers to myself. It was a really nice day to be out at sea. The temperatures were warm in a very cold conditions. But soon enough, the next of the systems hit me, and this brought in something like 30 to 40 knot winds. This was the 25th of December. This system continued to build in intensity until it was the New Year's Eve, and this is what the sea looked like then. It had built into a pretty nice storm. Wind speed exceeded 50 knots for the first time in the voyage, and it appeared as if the entire country was sending me its wishes in one go. Happy New Year. Now, 6 hours after celebrating New Year's, 6 hours into the 1st of January 2013, I crossed the international date line. And you know what happens when you cross the international date line from the west to the east? You have to shift your clock back by 24 hours. When you shift your clock by 24 hours, I went back into the 31st of December 2012. And I hold the record of being the first Indian to welcome 2013 and the last Indian to bid farewell to 2012. And I celebrated New Year's twice. And by the end of the day, I was really confused. I didn't know whether to celebrate my birthday on the 4th of February, on the 5th of February, or on the 6th of February. From here, I was stepping into the vastness of the Pacific. The Pacific is such a huge ocean that if you pluck out all the landmass in the planet and if you arrange it into the center of the Pacific, you will still have water left around you. In the middle of the Pacific, land ahead of you is about 4,000 kilometers. Land behind you is 4,000 kilometers. And nearest land is 4,000 meters right under you. And that's a very meaningless figure. It's here that I need to make a mention that if you play any other sport, you play cricket, you play football, you play hockey, you play chess, and you get injured, help is always at hand. Okay, in 1 or 2 hours, there's some doctor who will come and look at you. If you just get bored, you can go home. Okay, you can walk away from your field. But the crucial difference is in a solo sailing adventure like this is that in the middle of the Pacific, if something were to happen to me, it would take at least 15 days for any sort of meaningful rescue to reach me. And it was in the middle of the Pacific that a rope on top of that 25-meter mast parted, and I was forced to climb up. It took me almost 1 hour to reach the top, and 30 minutes to finish my work on top, and another 1 hour to come down. And when I opened my clothes, I realized that I had been so badly bruised that my entire body was black and blue. But this too was not the worst day at sea. Soon enough, I realized that I was to run into a catastrophe that was so huge that I almost decided to terminate the voyage and head to nearest land. You know what happened? When I was checking out my supplies, I realized that I was running short of an essential supply of popcorn. Man can sail without food, man can sail without water and wind, but I cannot sail without popcorn. So it was in the Pacific that I left the comforts of the roaring 40s, sailed into the furious 50s, and almost touched the screaming 60s. We passed south of Point Nemo, which is known as the oceanic pole of inaccessibility, and I sailed as far down south as 58.5 degrees. And when I put a picture of this, the position of the boat at 58.5 degrees on Facebook, somebody asked me, "What are you doing so far down south?" And I said, "I'm scratching the balls of the earth." Next up was the rounding of Cape Horn, and Cape Horn is known as the Everest of the oceans. Rounding Cape Horn is a very significant day in the life of a sailor. If you round Cape Horn in a sailboat, you get a privilege that is not allowed for any other person who's been at sea, to anybody who's never left land. For rounding Cape Horn, you're allowed to wear a gold earring on the ear that faced Cape Horn when you rounded it. Okay, so that is the kind of importance that is given to Cape Horn. And when you're on Cape Horn as part of a solo non-stop circumnavigation, the first Indian to attempt it, it becomes all the more important. Now, when I left India, the Navy asked me, give me the ETAs, the expected times of arrival. Now, I told them that, I'll be rounding Australia in December and Cape Horn in February, and March will be Cape of Good Hope. They said, no, you need to give exact ETAs. How can I give exact ETAs when I don't know what the wind is going to be like and I don't know what state the boat would be in? The Navy said, no, you need to give exact ETAs. So I said, very well. I did some quick calculations and I realized that I would be rounding Cape Horn on the 31st of January 2013. But I wanted to round Cape Horn on a day that would be significant to me personally and to the country. So it took a lot of risk. I sailed hard and I finally managed to round Cape Horn on the 26th of January 2013, our Republic Day. And that day, I hoisted the national flag. I hoisted the national flag just 1 mile south of Cape Horn, and possibly this was the farthest national flag that was hoisted from the country on that day. And what I was reminded of was words from the national anthem, Uchchala Jaladita Ranga, chanted by the waves of the ocean. It was such a bleak day to be out at sea, cold weather, temperatures about 4 degrees centigrade. The sky was grey, the sea was grey, but when you see the national flag, the tricolor fluttering in the backdrop of all this, you have no idea how proud you feel. And that day also happened to be the wedding anniversary of my parents. And for the first time in 86 days, I made a phone call. I called up my parents and wished them well. I called Admiral Awati, Commander Donde, and Ratnakar Dandekar. Ratnakar is a boat builder. Commander Donde was my mentor. And Admiral Awati is the godfather of the project. I called them up and thanked them for being such a fantastic support till now. And incidentally, this particular video, it's been made into a national anthem. And it was shown in almost 70 television channels on the last Independence Day, and it was shown for 1 week in every theater in Goa and Maharashtra before every movie. And that day, after 86 days at sea, I sighted land for the first time, and I was reminded of the words of a very famous French sailor who said, I no longer know how far I've got, except that we long ago left the borders of too much behind. The next day was a very bright and beautiful day. I was off this island called Estados in Argentina, and when I looked at the horizon, I saw this mast. I was very curious to find out who this boat was. 87 days at sea, you've not seen another sailboat, you've not seen a human being, and now you're confronted with the possibility of another human being within sighting distance. You want to know what's the name of the mast? I went inside, checked the name on the automatic identification system. It read Erika 12. Okay, so after 87 days at sea, I have some human being within sight. I'm so curious, I pick up the VHF set, give a call. 87 days at sea, I've not had a normal human conversation. Pick up the VHF set and give a call, and guess what reply I get? It's a woman. I spoke to her. I spoke to her for 10 minutes. At the end of the conversation, I asked her, can I see your face? She said, no way. Well, they were off on their way to the Antarctic, and I let them go. And I began the long crossing of South Atlantic. And the first thing to hit me, as usual, was another storm. This promised about 70 knot winds and 8-meter waves. So I was looking at something like, 60 knot, 55 knot winds and 8-meter waves. So I was looking at something like 70 knots and 16-meter high waves. And it was so bad that for the first time in the voyage, the boat almost went out of control. But once the storm subsided, a C-130J Hercules took off from the Falkland Islands. It gave me a low-level flypast. And when it landed back, it sent me back pictures of the boat. And this is what she looked like. This boat, built in India, had sailed half the way across the globe, and she still looked as good as new. Not a scratch on her, not a single problem except for that paradise that I'd parted. It was in the Atlantic crossing that I celebrated 100 days of solitude. I turned 34 at 34 degrees west, and I celebrated the boat's 4th birthday as we crossed 4 degrees west. And on Valentine's Day, we crossed prime meridian. So by now, I'd seen the worst of seas, I'd seen the worst of weather, and there was nothing much left for me to do except cross this tiny stretch of South Atlantic and come back to the Indian Ocean and head back to India on a route that I had done so many times before. But you see, there's a reason why Cape of Good Hope is known as the graveyard of ships, and the Cape had to live up to its name. The day I was crossing was the 19th of February, the birthday of Nicholas Copernicus. This last system was about to hit me. This promised winds of about 40 knots and I think 7-meter waves. And 40 knots and 7-meter waves was something so common for me that I really didn't bother. But what actually happened was that there was a huge buildup of system right behind me. It emptied itself all of a sudden and wind speed shot up to 70 knots. The boat almost went out of control. I was standing outside. I had to cling on to a wind so that I would not be thrown out of the boat. And suddenly the mast started shaking. When I looked ahead, I realized that a sail that I was not using had opened up a little bit and it had caught the onslaught of these winds. It was shaking the mast so severely that there was a good chance that the mast itself might get plugged out. Imagine this, I had sailed 2/3 the way around the world without any problem, and here I was facing a dismasting, and had the mast come off, this boat was so heavy that a jury-rigged mast would not be able to get me back home. I would have had to motor back to nearest port, Cape Town, and then end my voyage there. But what I did is, I stood on my feet, I let the sail open, I let it fly like a flag, it flapped and flapped and flapped, and it tore to bits, so that by the end of the day, this is what it looked like. But I'd sacrificed the sail, but I managed to save the mast. Now, when I did my voyage planning, I thought that I thought that the boat would be more or less okay till Cape Horn, and by the time we would be rounding Cape Horn, she would have sustained 50% damages. Half the steering gear would have gone, sails would have torn, so that from there on, I would be progressing at a much slower pace. But because of the fact that there were not too many problems with the boat, we landed up in the Indian Ocean about 1.5 months earlier than scheduled. Now, because of the fact that I was back in the Indian Ocean so early, cyclone season was still on, and there were 3 predicted cyclones, 2 off the coast of Australia and 1 off the coast of Madagascar. And the one off the coast of Madagascar became a reality. It was called Cyclone Haruna. I didn't want to go into this. I kept sailing towards Australia. I waited for this to dissipate, and I finally turned north. But there's a new problem now. I knew that I would be passing close to Mauritius. I knew that when I passed close to the Mauritius, pilots with whom I have served before, they are serving in the Mauritius National Coast Guard, they would be taking off on their dorniers and they would be taking pictures of the boat. And I did not want anybody outside of the boat to take a picture of this torn sail. Okay, I did not want anybody outside of the boat to take a picture of this torn sail. Usually, if you want to bring down a sail, all you need to do is open a line and the sail just falls down. Okay, but in this case, the sail was so badly torn that it refused to come down. I did not have a choice. As I passed Madagascar, I climbed the mast 13 times with a pair of scissors and continuously stripped off this sail so that by the time we passed Mauritius, and when the naval dorniers came and took pictures of the boat, there was not a shred of evidence of the torn sail left on the mast. We finally cleared the last of the Mauritius Islands on Mauritius National Day, which was the 12th of March 2013. And it was somewhere here that I sighted another vessel for the first time since I rounded Cape Horn. We almost had a close quarter situation, but once the vessel crossed clear of me, the Chinese watchkeeper on board, he wanted to have a conversation. Perhaps he felt very lonely in his ship. So he wanted to have a conversation. He called me up and he said, "Excuse me, you seem to be heading north. What's your destination?" I said, "Mumbai." He said, "Great, you're heading towards Mumbai. So where did you start from?" I said, "Mumbai." He said, "No, you're headed to Mumbai. Where did you start from?" I said, "Mumbai." He said, "No, if you're headed to Mumbai, where did you start from?" I said, "Mumbai." At the end of it, he was so confused that I had to clear the air, and I told him that, I'd started off on this long voyage around the planet. I'd spent 120 days at sea. I had rounded the 3 great capes of the southern oceans. I'd crossed 3 oceans. I had been through storms, 70 knot winds and 20-meter high waves. And when he heard my entire story, You know what he tells me? He says, you know, even I wanted to do something like this, but unfortunately, I'm not single. Once I got off, once I got out of the trade winds, uh, when I was sailing over the Sayadi Mala and Nazareth banks, which is slightly north of Mauritius, I found a day uh, which was calm. I managed to change the sail, and now the boat was restored back to square one. There was no problem with the boat. And in about 15-20 days, when I would reach Mumbai, I would claim the title of being the first Indian and the second Asian, not first, second Asian, and the 79th person in the planet to have performed a solo, non-stop, unassisted circumnavigation. All these titles were waiting for me, but the sea was not yet done with me. One day when I looked into the bilge tanks, into the bilges, I realized that a lot of diesel had leaked out, and this diesel had gone into my water tanks. Okay. Now, when I was rounding New Zealand, my RO plant had stopped working. So there was no way of converting seawater to fresh water. At that time, I was left with about 400 liters of water, and that I thought was good enough to finish the circumnavigation. I was still to do 2/3 of the voyage. I thought 300 liters was good enough to finish the circumnavigation. Now, at this point, the water tanks got contaminated. They became unusable. So I looked for the water bottles that I was carrying, and this is what the water bottles look like. Even the water bottles got contaminated. Then I searched the boat, and I discovered that I had 15 liters of water left in bottles which I could use. Okay, 15 liters, and if I sail fast enough, it would take at least 15 days for me to reach back home. Now, at sea, I anyway started brushing my teeth in seawater. I was going to the loo in seawater. I was taking bath in seawater. I was washing clothes in seawater. I was doing the dishes in seawater. With this problem, I even started soaking dal in seawater. I started washing rice in seawater. Finally, I got the consumption of seawater, fresh water to such a level that I was using less than 1 liter per day. Okay, imagine this. I was left with just 15 liters of water. And you know how much is 15 liters of water? Every time you go to the toilet and take a leak and flush once, you're using more than 15 liters of water. A man on land uses at least 40 liters of water just to flush toilets a day. A day, okay. And on land, he uses about 130 to 150 liters of water normally. I was left with 15 liters of water for a sailing that would last at least 15 days. I did a lot of weather planning. I didn't want to get stuck in the doldrums the way I did when I was on my way out. And we crossed the doldrums in a matter of just 12 hours. And finally, we crossed the equator for the second time in the voyage, 4 hours after the sun crossed from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere on the day of March equinox, the 20th of March 2013. And that is how, after a gap of 151 days at sea, I sighted Mumbai for the second time on the 31st of March 2013. There was a ship that was leaving harbor. There was a helicopter that came to take pictures of me, and sun was setting on Easter Sunday. It appeared as if I had resurrected myself. And as I sailed in that evening, there were no cannonading gun salutes. There were no cheering crowds. There were no dancing girls with pom-poms. But a few of my closest friends had gathered to give me a reception, and that included the CNC of the Western Naval Command. And when he saw me, he shook hands with me and he said, "Today you've made history out of geography. Many congratulations." So that is the story of how the name of an Indian was added to a list that was started in 1969 by a man called Sir Robin Knox Johnston, who too sailed around the world solo, non-stop and unassisted in a boat that was built in India. But personally for me, what I wanted to prove was that Thomas Friedman was wrong. The world is not flat. If you sail in one direction, you'll come back to the point where you started, and the world is actually round. Now, the next day, 1st of April, I went to have my passport stamped. And when the immigration police guy, when he saw me, he was so astonished. He went into a shock and stamped my passport upside down. Like I said, a man who rounds Cape Horn is allowed a privilege. He's allowed to wear a gold earring. The 1st of April, was the 2nd of April, a friend of mine gifted a gold earring, which I have the permission and the privilege to wear on my left ear. The other privilege that you get for rounding Cape Horn and Cape of Good Hope is that for each of these two great capes, Cape Horn and Cape of Good Hope, you're allowed to keep one leg on the dining table. Lunch follows. On the 6th of April, early in the morning, I left Bombay Dockyard. I sailed out and I came back. And then I climbed the steps of Gateway of India. And guess what? The president of the country himself was there to give me a reception. I saluted him and made report, sir, solo non-stop circumnavigation of the planet is complete. He saluted me back and he said, on behalf of 120 crore people of India, I welcome you back on land. So, that's been the story so far. The next 1 month proved very difficult because I had friends of mine like Earl who kept asking me, solo akele ne kiya kya? Were you alone in the solo circumnavigation? A lot of people think that, solo sailing means that you are alone in the boat with an engineer and a doctor and a cook and whatnot. I kept explaining that I was actually alone in the boat, but finally after a month I gave up and I said, no, I was not alone, I had friends with me. You know what's so special about this picture? This is the first time in the history of Tinkle that they have put the face of a living person on its cover page. They never put the face of a person on its cover page, and this is the first time they have done it. And again, my curious countrymen kept asking me, mermaid mili kya? Mermaid mili kya? I kept telling them that mermaids don't exist. But finally, I gave up and I said, yes, I found a mermaid and she was sitting on a rock offering me buttered toast. Thankfully, Earl did not ask me if I met Richard Parker because I think he's not seen the movie Life of Pi. But there were a lot of people who asked me, have you met Richard Parker? Have you met Richard Parker? Was there a tiger with you? I said, no, but you know what? I really met Richard Parker. He was waiting for me in a hotel lobby in Delhi one day. So, well, that's been the story. There's a nice famous quote from Nelson Mandela who said that there's nothing like returning to a place that remains unchanged to find the ways in which you yourself have altered. And these 5 months when I was absolutely separated from human society, I experienced so many things. I experienced so many things that I changed in so many ways. And here's a quick clip of what has happened to me. In 2011, Commander Donde handed over the Madai to me with 2 simple words in standard Navy issue terms, all yours. From that day, the Madai was my responsibility, and I was the Madai's in the long voyage across the longitudes. I knew the Madai would be an island by herself in the huge oceans, so I took only what I needed, and each item had a purpose. Clearly, less is more. Thus began our journey with just the winds, waves, and the sun to guide us. The sun always showed up and showered warmth. The winds tested us, loved us, and egged us on. The waves, sometimes angry, playful, and at times calming. It was the most adventurous of days. It was the most perilous of days. It was the most tumultuous of nights. It was the most tranquil of nights. It was the busiest of times. It was the slowest of times. With lots of friends on the way and everyday stories to lend meaning to life. They knocked us, they loved us, they respected us, they guided us. They shared our secrets and indulged in us with no expectations in return, with two simple words, all yours. 151 days and 23,000 nautical miles across longitudes and latitudes. We bring back no trophies, as we did not go on a conquest, but we bring back a lesson that you don't need a lot to live your life and be happy. Less is more. The earth provides enough to satisfy every man's need, but not his greed. Let's adopt less is more and hand over a clean and bountiful earth to our inheritors with two simple words, all yours. Thank you. Well, thank you, but I'm not done yet. I've not spoken for 5 months. And now I won't leave the mic. Well, in that 5 months that I was C and the next 5 months that followed, this voyage managed to capture the imagination of the country. We had more than 40 crore impressions, okay, and that too for something related to the sea. And the sea, or whatever, the oceans, Indians are historically known to be sea blind. And still this voyage managed to capture the imagination of this country. And the recall value of this project has been so high that in August, soon after I met Richard Parker, when I went to pick up my Tenzing Norgay National Adventure Award from the President, it was happening in Rashtrapati Bhavan. There were a lot of stars from the sporting field assembled there that day. It was the Arjuna Award day. So the President would get up and give the award and turn, smile and sit. And he was doing that for about 30 or 35 people. And finally, when I masked up, he looks at me and he smiles and says, "Remember, I came to receive you." And mid-December, when I went to gift him a copy of the book that I wrote, I walked up into his study and he was sitting in a sofa. He gets up and says, "Tommy, you're so black when you came in and now you're so fair." In fact, after that, he apologized for making me wait for 15 minutes that day on 6th of April. So that's Sagar Parikrama. It's a Indian Navy project, and it's a government project that has stuck to budgets and finished everything that was given to us within time. And in the 5 years that the boat has been in the Navy, she's become one of the most decorated units. Her skippers have got 1 Chaurya Chakra, 1 Kirti Chakra, 2 CNS commendations, 2 Tenzing Norgay National Adventure Awards, 1 MacGregor Award, 1 member, the only member in the International Association of Cape Horners, and many other awards and recognitions. And before I finish, I've got an announcement to make. This is Admiral Avati. Okay, I've written a book. That's a book that you see. It's called 151 Solitary Days at Sea, sailing non-stop around the world. I've got 1 copy of it with me. In case anybody wants to buy, I can sell 1 copy here. Otherwise, you can log on to the site It costs just 5 lakhs per piece. Special discount, you can buy it for 1,500 rupees. Well, thank you. I'm done.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask all the single girls in the audience, the single ladies in the audience to please stand up? All the single ladies in the audience, please. Sir, there's one guy who stood there. Okay. No, that is the man with the mics. Sorry. You mean to tell me there are no single ladies in the audience here? Well, the reason why I asked that is because, as Tommy said, the Chinese guy who asked him from the ship that he was passing, but who said to him that, he was the one, he would have done it as well, but he was married. Tommy is still the most eligible bachelor in our country today, ladies and gentlemen.
And I'm young also.
And he is very young indeed. So he is the true young Indian. First of all, as I said, Goa is very, very proud to be associated with the Made, not because of the fact that we are the only YI group to have had him do a session with us, but the Made was actually built in Goa. Much before, we've sailed on the Made before, yeah. And one of Tommy's classic quotes, I'm going to have to say it to you here, because he'd always tell me, the fact that the Navy has actually agreed to this, to me itself is a big achievement, because he said, in the Navy, as officers, our fundamentals are very simple, A, B, C, D, F. So the first time I was a little confused, so I asked him, what do you mean A, B, C, D, F? He says, well, A, avoid. If anybody asks you to do something, first avoid. And I said, what's B? B, you bypass, he says. You bypass, somehow or the other, you get out of the assignment which has been given to you. It's fine. What is C? Confuse. Confuse them, give them facts, figures, all kinds of nonsense. See that they completely confused. Which is what he did to that Chinese guy again. Confused him that he left India and came back to, he's going back to India. And then D, delay. And then I asked him, what's E and F? He says, if finally they, after all A, B, C, D, they still give it to you, you effectively F it up. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have a short Q&A session. So I'll ask you to pose your questions to Tommy. There is somebody who's giving mics around. If anybody could raise your hand if you have a question. While we are waiting, Tommy, I'll ask you, while you were up on the top of the mast, with the ship pitching, rolling, and the winds at you, what did you feel?
I was thanking God. Can you hear me? I can't hear myself. I was thanking God because, before I attempted the mast climb, I decided to change into a pair of fresh undergarments. So if something happened to me and 10 days later somebody were to discover my body,
So,
Go ahead, please.
yeah, you almost stole my question. But taking it further, Tommy, 151 days and 23,000 nautical miles all alone with the nature, battling with the nature, being one with the nature. Being as close to reality and being as farthest from the reality. What would be your most profound experience of being human would be like?
what I experienced was freedom. Okay, my boat it was just 17 meters in length. So if I walk in any one direction, I can't walk more than 17 meters. It was only 25 meters in height. So I couldn't go beyond that. There were physical limitations, but I experienced such freedom that I can't tell you. Unprecedented freedom. Freedom to think. Okay. Freedom to be what I wanted to be. Freedom from so many things that I had learned when I was growing up. You know, when you're out there alone, you realize that these are the conventions of the society. These are the norms of the society. They need not be right or wrong. Okay, I had freedom from such kind of external pressures.
Constraints and limitations.
Yes.
I do a bit of adventure sports myself. So when you're all alone, left to to be with the nature. That's one thing which you feel very profoundly, which is freedom from constraints and limitations.
Yes, you're right.
Self-imposed as well as societal.
Yes, you're right.
Thank
You know, there I could, when I'm on land, when anybody is on land, when do you eat? You eat at what, 7 or 8? Why do you eat? Do you eat because you're hungry? No, you eat because the rest of the planet is waking up at that time. Okay. Similarly, you work throughout the day and you sleep at night. Why? Because the rest of the planet goes to sleep at that time. Out at sea, I ate when I felt like, I slept when I had to. It was as simple as that. I wore, why do you wear these clothes when you're on land? So some wear colorful clothes, some wear a jacket, some wear a tie, etc. You don't wear it because you need to, but you need to impress somebody else. When I was out at sea, if temperature would be 4 degrees, I would wear 5 layers of clothes, and when temperatures would be 35 degrees, I would wear whatever I needed to.
Which in most instances was down to his kiwis. I'll take 2 more questions, so we're going to go first with a lady.
Very proud to be here with you. And I would like to just ask one thing. Do you think, you've just been back, but do you think you're going to do it again?
Of course, you know, when I had to give my speech in front of the president, I gave this 5 minutes of lamba chauda bhashan. At the end of it, I turned to the president and said, "Sir, can I go for one more round, please?"
Okay, another question? Okay. Oh, there's a lady who already has the mic. I'm sorry. That's going to be our last question.
Okay, so it was a privilege listening to you. And my question is that did it make you God-fearing? And did it bring out a philosopher in you? Did it make you God-fearing? Did it bring out a lot of philosophy and
Philosophers, I believe, come out of only bad marriages. I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I'm repeating the words of Socrates. He said every man must get married.
So I think
If
that
it works,
was that an edge for you that you were unmarried?
I think it helped because, you know, you don't have so many worries. But I'll tell you what, like I said, I experienced freedom. And one of the freedoms that I experienced was this concept of God. Okay, which was taught to me by somebody else, by a religion or by a person or by a book. So when I am out there alone, those concepts break down. And I experience God in a very different way. And I can tell you that God is not to be feared. I can tell you with conviction that God is not to be feared. He, she, or whatever it is not a terrible entity who imposes sanctions and penalizes you and gives you when you are a good person.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, basically the reason why I didn't stick to a normal introduction of Tommy was because I knew he would shine through. There was no need for an introduction for him. I'm sure he's bedazzled you all, and let us give him another standing applause as he leaves us now. Ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Commander Abhilash Tommy, Indian Navy.
Thank you. Thanks.